Every year, when Sparta's 5 ephors took office, their first official act was to declare war. Not on Athens, not on Persia, on their own population. Aristotle recorded why. The declaration was a legal instrument, and its purpose was to make sure that when a Spartan killed a helot, it did not count as murder in the eyes of the gods. No blood guilt, no pollution. A clean conscience, renewed annually by decree. That is the state you have heard of your entire life as the greatest fighting society in history, and almost everything you know about it comes from people who admired it from the outside, because Sparta itself refused to write anything down. Start with the thing that has no modern equivalent. Sparta's magistrates would select some of the ablest young men and send them out into the countryside. They carried daggers and a small amount of food, nothing else. By day, they scattered and hid themselves in out-of-the-way places and stayed hidden. At night, they came down onto the highways, and they killed every helot they came across. Sometimes they did not wait for the dark. Plutarch says they would take them in the fields, at work. This had a name. It was called the Krypteia, the hidden thing, the secret business. And it was not a rogue militia or a wartime measure. It was an institution of the Spartan state, staffed by the young men the state had decided were the most capable, and it ran against a population that grew Sparta's food. Now hold that next to the annual declaration of war, and look at what the two things do together. One removes the religious consequence. The other supplies the manpower. Sparta had built a machine for killing its own workforce, and then carefully removed the part where anyone had to feel bad about it. The helots were not slaves in the way the rest of the Greek world understood slavery. They were not bought at market, and they were not scattered through households, 1 or 2 at a time. They were an entire subject people, tied to the land, working the estates that fed the Spartan citizen body. That is what made the whole system possible. A Spartan man did not farm. He could not. He was a full-time soldier, and his food came from helot labor. And it is also what made the whole system terrifying to the people at the top of it. Thucydides says it flatly. Most Spartan policy was framed with a view to guarding against the helots. Most of it, not some. That is a historian who lived through the war, telling you that the defining feature of Spartan governance was fear of the people underneath. The killing was not the only method, and it may not even have been the main one. Spartans would take helots and force them to drink until they could barely stand. Then they would bring them into the public halls in front of the children and put them on display so the boys could see what a drunk man looks like. They made them dance ridiculous dances. They made them sing ridiculous songs. And they forbade them from singing anything better than that, because a song with dignity in it would have defeated the purpose. Sit with the design of that for a moment. It is not cruelty for its own sake, though it is certainly that as well. It is pedagogy. The helot's humiliation is a teaching aid in the education of a Spartan child, and the lesson has 2 halves. Half is, this is what excess looks like, do not become this. The other half, the one nobody had to say out loud, is, this is what they are, and this is what you are, and the gap between those 2 things is the natural order. Spartan children learned contempt as a school subject. It was on the curriculum, which brings us to what the curriculum did to the Spartan children themselves. It began before they could speak. A Spartan father did not have the power to decide whether his own child would be raised. He was obliged to carry the newborn to a place called the Lesh and present it to a panel of elders from his tribe. The elders inspected the infant. If they found it stout and well made, they gave the order for it to be reared. and allotted it one of the 9,000 shares of land that maintained the citizen body. If they found it puny and ill-shaped, it was taken to a place called the Apothetai, a chasm under Mount Taygetus, on the reasoning that it was better neither for the child nor for the public interest that it be brought up at all. Even the washing was a test. Spartan women bathed their newborns in wine instead of water, in the belief that weak or epileptic children would faint and waste away under it, while strong ones would come out tempered like steel. A child that survived all of that was then put into bands under a captain called an Iren, a young man of about 20, 2 years out of boyhood himself. And the food was deliberately, calculatedly insufficient. The boys were sent for wood and herbs, and the ration they were given was designed to leave them hungry. So they stole, they crept into gardens, they slipped into the eating houses when people were asleep or careless, and when they were caught, they were whipped without mercy, not for stealing, but for stealing badly, for being clumsy enough to be seen. Plutarch tells the story that everyone remembers. A boy stole a live fox and hid it under his cloak. He was stopped. Rather than be discovered, he stood there and let the animal tear out his bowels with its teeth and claws, and he died on the spot without moving. It sounds like propaganda, like the kind of story a society tells about itself, and Plutarch anticipates that and answers it with one sentence that is far worse than the fox. He says, "What is practiced to this very day in Lacedaemon is enough to gain credit to this story, for I myself have seen several of the youths endure whipping to death at the foot of the altar of Diana, surnamed Orthia." Plutarch is writing centuries after classical Sparta fell, and he is telling you, as an eyewitness, that he personally watched boys be flogged to death at an altar and that people came to see it. So why does none of this come from Sparta? Because Sparta made a decision very early that it would not write itself down. Plutarch says Lycurgus would never reduce his laws to writing, that there was a retra, a formal ordinance expressly forbidding it. The constitution of the most disciplined state in Greece was transmitted by memory and training, on purpose. The instinct went all the way down. Their common messes had a rule about the doorway. As each man entered, the eldest in the company would point at the door and say, "Through this no words go out." Even their food was a wall. The famous dish was the black broth, and the older men ate only that, leaving what meat there was to the younger. A king of Pontus heard about this broth and sent for a Laconian cook to make him some. He tasted it and found it disgusting. The cook told him, "Sir, to make this broth relish, you should have bathed yourself first in the river Eurotas." That is a joke about untranslatability. You cannot have this. You had to be here. And after the meal, every man walked home in the dark, because lights were forbidden, so that they would grow used to moving confidently through the night. Now put that on top of everything you have just heard about the Krypteia, a society that trains itself to move without light, keeps no written laws, and makes a rule that nothing said inside leaves the room. Some of what we cannot see about Sparta is genuinely lost, and some of it was engineered, which is why the moments where the record does break through matter so much. Here is one. Thucydides, and it is the single most disturbing sentence in Greek history. Sparta made an announcement. Any helots who believed they had served best in war should come forward and declare themselves, and they would be given their freedom. Understand what is being tested here. The helots who came forward would be the ones with courage, initiative, and standing among their own people, the ones who believed they had earned something. roughly 2,000 of them came forward. They were crowned with garlands. They were led around the temples as free men, in public, in celebration. And then they were gone. Thucydides is in no doubt about what happened. The Spartans made away with them, but it is his next clause that never lets go of you. Nobody ever knew in what way each one perished. Plutarch, writing 4 centuries later, says the same thing independently. No man either then or since could give an account of how they came by their deaths. 2,000 people, honored in public, in front of witnesses, in a small state where everybody knew everybody. And not one account of a single death survives. That is not a gap in the record. That is the record telling you that a state disappeared 2,000 of its own people so thoroughly that the historians of the ancient world could only confirm the absence. So that is the machine. Now here is the part that Sparta's own legend could not survive. The year is 425 BC. On a small island called Sphacteria, off the western Peloponnese, a force of Spartan hoplites is cut off by an Athenian fleet. 420 of them had crossed onto that island. They were blockaded for 72 days. Their commander, Epitatus, deliberately issued each man less than the supplies allowed, the same instinct as the boys and the stolen food, applied to grown soldiers under siege. Then the Athenians landed, and it ended in a way nobody in Greece thought was possible. 292 of them came off that island alive, as prisoners, shipped to Athens. 120 of those were full Spartiates, the citizen elite. They surrendered. Thucydides says that of all the events of that entire war, this came as the greatest surprise to the Hellenic world, because men could not conceive that the Lacedaemonians would ever be induced by hunger or any other compulsion to give up their arms. Everyone assumed they would keep them until they died, fighting as long as they were able. The reputation was that absolute, and it was wrong. There is a footnote to this that is better than the battle. Sometime afterwards, one of Athens' allies is needling a Spartan prisoner and asks him, with obvious malice, whether the Spartans who died on that island were the good and noble ones, meaning, the brave men died, and you are what is left. And the prisoner answers that an arrow would be worth a great deal if it could tell the good men apart from the rest. That is a man who has lost everything, standing in captivity, telling his captor that courage is not a filter that missiles respect. It is the most human sentence any Spartan says in the historical record, and he says it after the surrender, not before. And Sparta knew immediately what the loss of that island meant. The Athenians fortified Pylos and put Messenians there, people whose ancestors had been conquered by Sparta, who spoke the same dialect as the helots. They raided Laconia from that base, and Thucydides says they did the most damage precisely because they spoke the same language. Helots began deserting to them, and the Spartans, he writes, were inexperienced in this kind of warfare and afraid that something wider would break out across their territory. They did not bear it easily, and although they were unwilling to let the Athenians see how much it mattered, they sent envoys. The strongest land power in Greece went to the negotiating table, not because it had lost a battle, but because a few hundred of its enemies were sitting on its coast, speaking to its workforce in their own language. Every fear the Krypteia existed to manage had just walked ashore. One last thing, and it is about the men everyone does remember. Thermopylae. 300 Spartans, and you know the number, because everything about the way that story is told is designed to make you know it. Herodotus, who is the source for all of it, also tells you that 700 Thespians were there, and that when Leonidas dismissed the other allies, the Thespians refused to go. Their commander was Demophilos, son of Diadromes. They stayed and died with him, and Herodotus says explicitly that they did it willingly. He also tells you that 400 Thebans stayed, but as hostages, kept there because Leonidas did not trust them, and that when the end came, they went over to the Persians, and Xerxes had most of them branded with the royal mark anyway. And he tells you the reason Sparta sent only 300 men to hold a pass against an empire. The festival of the Carneia was on. The plan was to celebrate it, leave a garrison, and then come in full force. They did not expect Thermopylae to be decided so quickly, so they sent what Herodotus calls the forerunners of their army. The 300 were an advance party. And then there is Aristodemos, who survived. He came home to Sparta, and no Spartan would give him fire from their hearth, and no Spartan would speak to him. They called him Aristodemos the coward. He had to throw himself into the fighting at Plataea and die there to clear it. Another man survived too, Pantites, sent away as a messenger to Thessaly. He came back to Sparta, found what was waiting for him, and hanged himself. That is Sparta with the sources open. An annual declaration of war on its own workforce, so that killing them carried no guilt. Young men sent out with knives to hunt in the dark. Drunk helots paraded in front of children as a teaching aid. Infants inspected by committee and abandoned in a chasm. Boys whipped for being caught and whipped to death at an altar in front of an audience, which a historian says he saw with his own eyes. 2,000 people promised freedom, garlanded, and then erased so completely that nobody could say how any of them died. And a state that built all of that, and then made a law against writing it down. Almost everything in this video comes from 3 men who were not Spartan: an Athenian general who lost a war, a Halicarnassian traveler, and a Greek biographer under Roman rule, writing 400 years too late. Sparta wanted to be remembered as the 300. It got its wish, and that is the erasure. Not that the record was destroyed, but that one story was polished until it covered everything else. Subscribe for more history that got buried.